Hello and welcome to Show Studio's live panel discussions. In these discussions, experts from all parts of the industry discuss and debate the important Fashion Week shows this season. Today, we will be talking about Thebe Magugu. My name is Lyall Hakaraia and I'll be chairing the conversation. I have been a designer for many years and work across the cutie POC community in London. Io, you're next.
Yeah, so I'm Io. I'm a fashion journalism student at St. Martin's, and I'm going to have a lot of fun talking about this because at school I did a whole project and zine project on Thebe Magugu's work, and I got to interview him as well.
Amazing.
Daniel, would you like to go next?
Oh, hi. My name is Daniel Obasi. I'm a stylist, photographer, and an art director from Lagos, Nigeria. And also this is going to be fun to discuss because I do actually, just like I said, I've met Thebe. I think that was like in 2018 or 2019 at the Arise Fashion Show in Lagos. And I think that was one of the few times I was like introduced to his work. And it's just amazing to see how far he's grown, both as an individual and also as a brand across like both in South Africa and all over the world generally.
And Georgia.
Yeah, hi, my name is Georgia Moot. I'm a model and a presenter from London.
Simple.
I know, yeah.
I suppose the first thing is that obviously I've watched a bit and done a bit of research about Thebe as well. And I kind of really love the thing about how the family's involved and, all that sort of like that research and that base research for everything comes from lived experience, from family. I think that's great to sort of see that and to sort of see not other lives, but to see, other people's interpretation of their lives as well from across the world, which is fantastic. Io, as you said, you had spoken to them as well. And when you did your research, what sort of things did you find out?
Oh my God, how much time do we have?
I know, exactly. It is amazing though, isn't it? There's so much.
Yeah, it's, I think what really stands out to me is the amount of research he does. He does describe the brand as really intellectual. And I think when I interviewed him, one thing he said is that through his brand, he wants to tell African stories that would otherwise be untold. Because I think when you think of European designers, it's not necessarily a diss, but a lot of them reference the same things over and over and over again. And it does get a bit boring. So it's good to see someone like Thebe Magugu telling stories I've never heard of. Like Spring Summer 21, which was counterintelligence about apartheid spies. I had loads of fun like reading loads of books about it to really understand the work. So I think the fact that he's even teaching me about some African stuff that I never would have known about is something I really love about his brand.
Yeah, and that lived experience of his is so imbued in the whole collection as well. Daniel, when you met him as well, what sort of feeling did you get from him about those sorts of, topics about who he is?
I think I met him briefly. I think it was quite, 2 years ago or so. I think that was his first time coming to show in Lagos, and I wasn't, it was more from a distance, and I love the, like you said, very intellectual aspect of his collection, and it was very thoughtful, even the structures. And one thing I noticed was always the way he positioned women, and like the power in which all of the collections always have. It was always very uplifting, and I think that has just grown in leaps and bounds. Like you see that every season, it's like a whole new layer to his take on what femininity is, his take on what a powerful woman is. And I think it's brilliant. His use of abstract, his storytelling and techniques as well are always centered around like African nuances and like, things that I'm not South African, I'm Nigerian. So like I can see like, oh, traces of this even in the way we do things in Nigeria. And it's really good to see that like being embodied by a brand like Thebe Magugu, to be honest.
And Georgia, how do you relate to the work?
I really love like you were saying it previously, firstly the kind of the education that you get from it, and the kind of in-depth referencing that you can tell that he's done, and then also the kind of overarching matriarchal feel of like what it is to be a woman, which I also love that it comes from a kind of personal place, but then is also so relatable and also just quite different, I mean, we talk a lot about strong women, but I think it's like you really get that kind of from his work. And I also just love the fact that oftentimes any kind of African country story is in like it's often told from a European standpoint if it's referenced. And I just think it's so important that we kind of actually have people who are obviously from the African diaspora telling their own stories instead of what so often happens, which is like heavy referencing or appropriating and kind of diluting.
And I mean, I think the other thing that's like really important and talks, I think, to lots of Indigenous cultures is that family that is so important, that kind of, that structure that supports people is really amazing. And I love, in lots of the interviews that the mum and the aunt are always there in the background, and they've always got, you kind of feel like it's a family, it's not a, an abstract sort of thing about, designers talking about the intellectual inspiration for the collections. It's like right there next to him, and it's with him all the time, which I think in Indigenous cultures is like, ancestors are present and with you all the time, and I love that his are physically there as well. I mean, obviously you've done lots and lots of research. I mean, was there anything else that kind of stood out to you as well? I mean, the family, the women, I love that, the grandma, the aunts, the mum, everybody was kind of involved in his journey as well. Anybody else that you picked up on that was really important, or any other element?
I think he likes to tell different stories that fascinate him. So there's no like one route to like how he tells his stories. If something interests him, he'll tell it. But I think the way he designs or the way he thinks, I think it comes from where he's from, because he's from a town in South Africa called Kimberley. And it's not really a well-known place. Like when people say, oh, where's Kimberley? No one will really know. And it comes from this idea, and he has a magazine where he talks about this, where he was saying that when you're from a small town like that, and people don't know the town, you kind of grow up wanting to tell stories about a place that no one knows about. And that also seeps into his work, where once again, he likes to tell stories that are untold. So I think in terms of like a brand philosophy, that's kind of where it comes from.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, there is all of that. There's, I mean, yeah, obviously the narratives and the storytelling are like really amazing. And as you sort of said already, I mean, I love that one about, women sort of working at home, and, the alkaline dyes that, were representing like the color dyes and things like that. I think there's so much layering of like information and everything as well. And, it's, yeah, I mean, it's really incredible storytelling because there's so much. I mean, Daniel, have there been any of the particular collections that you've really loved with the storytelling as well?
I think so far, this particular collection is my favorite. What's it called? The Autumn Winter 21. I think it's my favorite because it's his most dramatic collection yet. Like, don't get me wrong, he's very avant-garde, but like this is one time I'm like, oh my God, Thebe, like it's like he went in and really pulled something very personal out, and it's impossible to like, not think about it or talk about it. I love their issues of like spirituality, because like spirituality is one big thing that affects all of us as Africans, because, with the whole ideals of like Western imposition of Christianity, and okay, there's always also this conversation about, oh, what is African religion, and like, where do you find a balance? So it's always interesting for me to see artists like Thebe or anybody really bring spirituality into the work that they do and present it in such a brilliant and like very informational and also educative like format. I'm also like looking at the processes that he's kind of used. For example, there's divination involved, where I think the stylist, who is also like a traditional healer, Noentla Kumalo, I think the process was her throwing interesting objects across a map. And that I don't know what it's called in South Africa, but like in Nigeria, that's called like divination. It's your way of trying to know what's to happen, you know, when you have and also realize that it started from her asking a question of like, what's next? You know, like you want to know what's going to happen. It's like a conversation about fate. So it's really brilliant to see all this kind of symbolism in this collection. And I think that's what makes it my favorite. I also like, because I love the collection a lot because of the presence of queerness in it. And I think when I watched the film Christine Limumman made with him, it was very, very, very strong. And yeah, I think, I don't know, but like I don't want to go into all the full details here because I know we're still like going in, but that's like, this is my favorite collection from him so far. Yeah.
I love what you just said about how like stuff that I wouldn't have known looking at it because I wouldn't have been so educated on the culture. But then it's like, so it's not only aesthetically stunning, but then it also kind of has this, when you look into it more and you like invest more time and really look behind it, you find out like a really amazing cultural aspect as well. And I love clothing like that, or collections like that, where there's an idea and it's like, obviously aesthetically it's beautiful, but it has like so much more kind of behind it. And I think that's what we're talking about, the kind of education side of it and the heavy like referencing and research that they obviously do in, you know, in putting together their collection. I think it's so great. And I loved what I got from this collection overall was just such a strong sense of story, even if I wasn't fully aware of all of the cultural references. Yeah, exactly, the symbolism. Yeah,
I mean, I think for me also, because he's kind of finding a way of transcending beyond like taking the clothes from just being fashion to being like, you know, art pieces, because you could even decide to collect these clothes, and because of the amount of, you know, research, the amount of work, the amount of everything that's behind it, kind of raises the value, the aesthetic value of the item for me, to be honest.
And it just highlights how little we know about other cultures as well, which is kind of like, you know, something we all have something to learn from each other, which I think is absolutely amazing as well. And, you know, and for me, it was like a joy to do the research on this as well. It's like, oh, I'm going to follow that up and follow that up. It's great.
Yes.
And then we touched on the film. I think the film's quite incredible because it's so strong and so it's kind of cinematic, and you know there's like such amazing kind of scenes kind of going on it, especially with, you know, people walking across the skyline, the blacks, the whites, the red, you know, and it's like it's such an amazing, visually so amazing as well. And I love the story is kind of simple but odd and wonderful. There's so much great stuff going on in that as well. I think it's really wonderful to sort of see somebody embrace, I think, the medium of sort of fashion film and doing it in a different way and in a fresh way as well. Because I've not really seen that, because the stories that you usually see are sort of almost metaphors for something else, rather than there is a whole story in here as well. And then the clothes fit perfectly into it. You know, it's wonderful. I love it. And I love the casting as well. It's fantastic.
I mean, I think it's been really interesting, like, obviously during like this pandemic and this whole year, everyone has kind of been given the space to present their collections in their own way, and I think that has been really exciting. But it also is like gives quite a wide berth to people and like or to houses, and I think some of them are really like hit and it's been something a bit different and it's really worked, and then others maybe it's a bit more like, oh, I kind of preferred it when it was like the show, like how it normally was, or you know. And but I think this is a really great example of how it works so well and how this story is kind of transported so, like, I'm just really glad that everyone gets to see it and that it isn't something that is kind of really like exclusive or just like in a show that only certain people can see. I'm really glad that it's kind of been democratized, is that the word I'm looking for? Or, you know, like it's just like everyone's basically able to watch it. But I loved the intro sequence where they're like marching in, and then also in the outro when they're marching out. And I just thought like the visuals of it, and down to just even like the grading, the color grading and the backdrops was really, really stunning. And there's one where like there's a scene where two of the girls are like fighting, and one of them's wearing a blue outfit, one of them's wearing the pink outfit, and then the background is like this white kind of cliffy rocky area. And I just like, it was so, without even like it being moving image, the shot of it was so gorgeous and really powerful, and just so well thought through. And like you said, the clothes just slotted into that so perfectly. Even this bit where it's almost like an army and they're all wearing the same dress, but it's like it works so well with the story that was also being told, which is really hard to do when you're trying to put out a project, but also it's your collection, but it's kind of not obviously like, hey, look at my clothes and my collection, but also they're not falling to the wayside. You know, it really like hit that perfect kind of middle ground of like showing off the clothes and the beautiful work, but then also, like you said, slotting in so well to the narrative as well.
Yes, well, I mean, the colors are great.
Yeah, oh sorry. I mean I think I think visually it's like a really beautiful film, because like every frame, like you said, it's perfectly thought through. But then I also think about like the idea of the film as it looks at, again, spirituality, and it also looks at like the mythology and like sexuality as it is. For me, those are like the strong themes that I can take out of the film. And it's brilliant because I don't really, again, see a lot of stories from this part of the world that even, I think, or anywhere in the world that tries to represent, what's it called, sexuality in this kind of narrative. And I think he and Christy Lee Mooman have done such a brilliant work of making it both a soft story, but also a very hard story at the same time. You know, like I watched the scene where the two beautiful women were by the lake, and that could be anybody, you know, that could represent so many things. And especially right now in Africa, or in places around the world where it is important for queer representation to be very obvious. It's brilliant to see Thebe using this moment to, like, you know, to celebrate queer love in a very dysfunctional space.
But I love, I just love the kind of the groups of women and all those colors. Yes. I mean, it like en masse, there's so much power just in that, you know, it was like 6 or 7 women dressed identically, but all with their own sort of power and all with their own kind of vibe as well. It's wonderful. I love it. It's great. And was there any parts, I suppose, of the recent show that anybody kind of liked in particular, or any of the clothing in there that anybody, because obviously we can bring that up and have a look at it at the same time as well. Was there anything that anybody particularly liked?
I think I liked the dyeing process. I think one of the clothes, I'm trying to find the one, I don't know. It was like it's the big outfit with like the green patterns in it.
Oh yeah.
Yes, the dress with the green pattern in it. I think it had something to do with scarification. Yeah, it had like a lot to do with it was a metaphor for, like, you know, scarification, which also is like some sort of rites of passage, I think, to certain tribes, where, you know, but it's also like a thing of beauty, and it's also a thing of pain, you know. So him being able to find a way to interpret that into fabric was kind of very interesting for me to see. Because, you know, also like the way the symmetry or the flow that he was able to create with the pattern across other pieces of clothing as well was quite interesting. And I am very obsessed with the footwear. I think this is my first time seeing this kind of boots, especially, and I'm just like, how do I get it, or where do we get it from? What sizes do they come in? It's definitely a killer part of the collection. And also the use of colors is quite interesting, because, like, you know, there's white obviously, but then there are other colors there that I find to be very powerful. I think what's it called? There's the way the green especially was used in the collection is, to me, is really brilliant. Again, when we need to talk about the process of creating I think the pattern that is on one of the most brilliant pieces there. Like I think when I read the press release, I got to understand that it was created by Kumala, you know, throwing these beautiful things against the mat again, and it being photographed. and, you know, taking out abstractly and reflecting on, you know, on the print that was used within the collection. I think that is one way of, you know, fabrication that I've never really thought about, even as a stylist. And I'm just really, really impressed by that. And the structure of what came out of that process was really like breathtaking. And that's what I was referring to when I said these pieces kind of like transcend just, you know, fashion. No, they look like something you can, like, you know, I want to just house this or put this somewhere because of all the research, because of all that it stands for or represents. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's so interesting, especially like obviously fashion's been around for a very long time, and there's a lot of kind of recycled techniques, and people manage to do that very well, but it's oftentimes that it's not often that you find a completely like new way of, like you said, creating a pattern or a way that is so unheard of or like culturally linked and relevant. And I think that's what it is. It's so exciting, and like that's what we kind of look towards for these like younger designers, is just like that level of excitement where you're like, oh my god, I've never seen that done before. And I think that's really what you get from this collection, even like you're saying about the shoes. And I think this is Thebe's first time doing shoes, right? And they're like the most stunning shoes, and like you said, it's not ones that we've seen loads of times before. I mean, they're just like, they're really sexy, basically. Like, I want a pair. like
yeah, even
so
the way
good.
even the way the cut is. I mean, Thebe is like, one of the things I love about Thebe's work is the way his clothes are cut. You know, like the pleats are always there. You know, he still retains all this little traditional, like, you know, themes that you have within his collection, like the use of pleats, the way the skirts are made. But here it's just taken to a whole new level, you know, of grandeur that I'm like, oh, okay. And it makes me more excited to actually see what Thebe is going to bring out in the coming season. But more than anything else, I'm happy with how this collection positions, like, you know, South Africa, in the way it positions Thebe as a brand, because, you know, in just such a short year of, you know, after LVMH and all of that, he's gone on to, you know.
That's what I was about to say. I think we should talk about LVMH as well. Yes.
Yeah, he's gone on to, you know, go back into himself and create, I mean, much more stunning, you know, work. You know, and I also love that he's working within his community and also just making sure that people who, like his family, his friends, are still very much engraved into the process of building this beautiful brand that, you know, that has won its way into millions of people's hearts in a space of just a year.
Yeah, and so obviously, yes, there is the investment from LVMH now as well. And I mean, how does everybody kind of feel about that? I mean, obviously, it is an amazing opportunity as well. And, you know, I think there would be lots of designers that we wouldn't know as well without that investment, and obviously highlighting it as well. So, I mean, yes, I mean, I think this is a great choice for them, but I mean, there's been a lot, I wouldn't say controversy, but I think there's been a lot of interesting decisions made along the way with that. And especially highlighting, I suppose, marginalized or indigenous people as well is like really important that they've been doing that as well. But yeah, I mean, it's just, I think sometimes some of them who have won it, I still know about, and others have fallen by the wayside. So, I mean, there's no guarantee that with their investment and with that money, that there's going to be longevity. I mean, I feel with Thebe, because Thebe has this sort of progression as well. I mean, how do we sort of feel with it? Is it, I mean, obviously it's a brilliant thing, but then does it also become a milestone at some point where it's like, oh, they were the one who won LVMH, where have they gone now? I mean, is there also within that mechanism of LVMH some responsibility to keep on supporting people after they've had the money as well? I mean, how do you all feel about that as well?
I don't know much about what goes behind the scenes with the LVMH thingy, but what I do know is when, you know, such huge investment is made into your brand, of course, there will be checks and balances to make sure that, you know, you're going the right way and that you're concerned about the market, you know, like whatever it is that you're putting out there is marketable. And I think one of the key things we need to realize is that we've moved from a society that's 100% superficial to a society that is much more concerned about like, oh, what am I wearing? Who am I wearing? You know, like there's a lot more thought that goes into what people wear these days. You know, when people go to buy clothing, you know, it's a much more intelligent society that we're in. We're more concerned about environment, we're more concerned about so many of these things. And Thebe Magugu is a designer who is very much concerned with all of these points, you know. So, and you can see that clearly in the way he communicates with the clothes. So I definitely think that that's probably one of the reasons why his clothing is much more stronger now, because, you know, it's like, oh, okay, the playing field is out there, you know, there's a whole market to conquer, but how do I make sure that whatever it is that I'm putting out there into the market makes a lot of sense? And that's what he's doing right now, you know, by creating clothes that are conversations, you know, rather than just items to buy and keep in your closet. So yeah.
Anybody else want to comment about LVMH?
I mean, it's interesting because obviously it's such a big company, and then from Thebe's work you really get a sense of kind of locality. Is that a word? Have I made that up? I don't know. Or a sense of kind of like community. And even with if it's not local to kind of South Africa or him, he's I think in the kind of press release it said about sourcing some of his materials from like Japanese I can't remember the exact
It was
details,
a Japanese weaver that he's working with,
yes. Yeah. There still seems to be like a level of locality, and I find that really interesting, because I can imagine if you're getting like a huge, quite, you know, not only a huge sum of money, but also like just huge recognition from a big brand like LVMH, being able to still keep that is really, like, I think something very special and something that's quite tricky, because it would be, I can imagine, quite easy to just go over to slightly bigger or more kind of mass-produced ways of, like, you know, kind of lose some of the like the smaller creativity, which I think is really special that hasn't been lost, and that there's still a way of like your work being commercialized or maybe more like available and more funded, but not kind of not kind of having to sacrifice any of your integrity as a brand and your kind of cultural references and your traditions and your heritage, you know, still being able to hold the two in one, which I think is a really special meeting point.
Hey, we haven't heard from you for a while. What have you got to say about this?
I have a tendency to talk a lot, so I'm trying my best not to.
Please do, go ahead.
When it comes to LVMH, the first thing is, when it comes to fashion, a lot of designers aren't good when it comes to finances. They're good creative people. So I think, like you said, there are a lot of LVMH brands that they've gotten all the money from the prize and all that stuff, and they've kind of dwindled away because they don't know how to manage the finances. And this is something I've talked about with him. And he said that he really doesn't want to end up being that person that won the LVMH prize, didn't use the prize to his advantage, and then dwindles away like a lot of brands have. So I see that he's very like resourceful. And another question I asked him was, so normally when people win LVMH prizes and things like that, they move to Paris. Like everyone just seems to just run to Paris once they get any success. And apart from obviously him wanting to develop the infrastructure in South Africa and support the fashion community there, it's also a thing of where he doesn't want to like use the money unwisely or manage his funding unwisely. And that's something that I really like, and it's something I did talk to him about a lot, because a lot of designers, they get very lost in this wanting to be like a creative. They forget the business aspect, and that's why a lot of brands don't last. And even to talk about the LVMH prize, some controversy actually was when he went to Italy one time, there was an article that came out in Sister magazine where someone came up to him and said, the only reason you won it was because you're African. And I think that sort of, and it's something I really want to talk about, because I think that sort of ignorance, it comes from education. I mean, I study fashion journalism at Central St. Martin's, and all we learn about is Europe. Whether we're talking about the swinging 60s, the roaring 20s, the Italian Renaissance, nothing about Africa. And that's why I get so fascinated and excited about his work, because when he releases a collection, I'm like, okay, great, there's more books to read about Africa and there's more stuff to learn. or when I see a Mexican designer do something. I think as a journalist, your job is to want to learn about fashion in a totalitarian way and not just European fashion, which is what a lot of journalists are right now, which is why they look at Thebe's work and they can't really contextualize it because they haven't taken the time out to learn anything other than the Italian Renaissance, for example. So I think that's just a big aspect I wanted to talk about.
Well, you've got the floor. You can keep on talking about it because there's so much. I mean, there really is so much there. That I mean, it's. I think there's a lot of laziness in fashion, where people. There's an awful lot. So you know, the idea of people having to learn for some of them is a big challenge, and it's stuff that they just don't want to do. It's like, well, it's much easier if I do this. Why would I want to, spend my time? But I mean, obviously, if you are a creative, then you want to be fed creatively. And, somebody like Thebe is like, it's a Pandora's box of like the most amazing stuff. It's a whole universe of like new stories that you just don't know about as well. And I mean, it's for me, it's exciting. And I mean, you would hope for other people in fashion it would be, but I know that's not always the case as well. And I mean, I'm sure you must have spoken to Mayo about these sorts of things as well, and about these challenges, about telling the stories, because I mean, obviously for him, he also has to frame them in a way that Europeans can understand it as well. So, I mean, he must have to purposely put things in place for that to happen, for them to understand it. And I'm sure you two must have spoken about that. So what was his comments or his thoughts about those things as well?
Yeah, I mean, aesthetically, the one thing about Thebe is the balance in his work. I know Daniel touched on it earlier. He has a way of, his tailoring looks very modern, but it's also very South African. That comes from the ideas behind it, or the textiles he uses, or the prints that are on it, or the stories he's trying to tell through it. But still, when you look at the clothing aesthetically, it's something that is palatable for a Western audience. And I do think that a lot of African brands, they have a tendency to look so African in a way where Westerners won't really understand it, or they won't take to it. And I think his brand has that perfect balance where it's not watered down, and he's still unapologetically like African and South African, but it's still something that people can understand.
Well, I think there's that intelligence, isn't there? That, as you sort of said, there's palatable shapes that Europeans can understand, but it's that storytelling, which, and that intelligence and the intellectualism, which, journalists and, students and lovers of fashion love to go into. So he's telling new stories that way. I mean, I'm from New Zealand, I'm from the Pacific. So then, most people think, when you see sort of Pacific things, it's going to be people in grass skirts or feathered cloaks or things like that. So to kind of break out of that is really hard, because people are like, they're not doing the haka. Why are they not jumping up and down and slapping themselves? It's like, I don't understand this. And, for younger designers in the Pacific, it's not difficult, but it's about telling those new stories. That is the real kind of challenge, and getting people to kind of latch onto them as well. And, there are really fascinating queer collectives there, like Fat Swag, who have their own version of Vogue balls, but they're also filmmakers, fashion designers, musicians. So a bit like Thebe and people like Faka and all of that kind of really amazing creativeness that was happening in South Africa, or has been for the past 10 years or more. There's a groundswell of like new voices being heard. So, there's so much, as you said, designers from Mexico, there's like so much for us to kind of learn about and be excited about.
I agree. Sorry.
No, carry on. Sorry.
Okay, I was just going to say, I still think it comes down to education, because I think, once again, CSM, when they teach us who the great designers are, what names do we hear? Christian Dior, Cristobal Balenciaga, Mary Quant. And yes, I get it, but it will make someone feel like fashion only existed in Europe, and everywhere else in the world, probably fashion didn't exist, or people weren't wearing clothes, or designs weren't being made. And I think that narrative, it seeps into journalists' heads to the point where they can't come out of that way of thinking. And then they then don't understand anything. Neither do they want to or try to. And I think that's what we really need to break down, because then that's how you don't have people saying, oh, the only reason you won was because you're African, when they don't even understand anything about Africa or know anything about African fashion.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna basically touch on, is that idea of it also must be quite frustrating to feel like you're constantly coming up against certain stereotypes, or you're kind of inadvertently being pitted as some kind of like pioneer just because of kind of European ignorance, basically, which is oftentimes just quite, I mean, even within the fashion industry, the fact that people feel like they have to live within a certain 4 cities to be able to kind of be worthy of being in the industry or to have the best opportunities. And it's like this understanding, and again, I think that's something this year has maybe helped people explore as well, is like the idea that you don't necessarily have to be in these hubs, but it can be extremely tiring to constantly be kind of resisting that, you know. Like, I don't think we should downplay the weight of being within a narrative which is kind of telling you that you maybe should be positioned to a more European clientele, or that you should be, or that you should water down. Like, it's quite, that I can only imagine would take quite a lot of resilience to be able to toe that line constantly between, like you were saying earlier, not watering yourself down, but then also still being palatable enough, I guess, is, you know, to a kind of European Western audience.
And I mean,
I think there's a very interesting way that, I mean, you can clearly see that he's done it in being able to think of, you know, where I come from and, you know, the European market, as you might say. And I think a reference point would be one look in the collection that has like some sort of like a draping over it. It's yeah, that's the one. So that draping is very traditional in the sense, like it's like a woolen fabric that you wrap around yourself. It's very South African as well, but then the tailoring inside is very modern. The tailoring is very like very sharp. The tailoring is it's what you would probably see on a ready to wear show somewhere, you know. But then here he has, you know, with all this symbolism, with all this print, with all this pattern, still made it, you know, his own. So I think he's a very brilliant designer, and it's obvious that he's thinking about all of these factors, you know. And it's unfortunate it's going to be twice as hard because, like you just said, people are already asking questions like, oh, saying things like, oh, you won because of, it's like you have so much to prove. And I don't want him to feel that way as a designer. And I don't even think that's a good way for anybody to feel. You know, I would want him to still stay true to himself and to still create without the pressure of, you know, trying to fit into a box that, you know, the Western journalists, fashion journalists have created for what an ideal designer is. So, because to be honest, there's no really such thing as, oh, this is the perfect designer. It's just people who obviously have their techniques, have their style, have their own stories, using whatever they have, you know, in terms of resources to tell the stories. And long before LVMH, I think Thebe has been telling that story. And it just seems to, it's only seems like it's only going to get bigger. And it's a beautiful brand because it's not just offering us beautiful clothes, but it's also offering us education. Like we talked about the previous collection he did that reference appetite. And to be honest, there's not a lot of references, modern references today that talk about like appetite or how a lot of women were involved, like the Black Sash movement were involved in that anti-appetite movement. So seeing a brand that makes you go like, oh, wait, I need to go back to my history book. Oh, wait, I need to go back to research is very important. Also because of the political climate that we're in. You know, I'm sorry if I'm just like pulling all these little things, but it's just hard not to, you know, see how all of these things kind of like play across each other. And I think his brand is very important and it's a very, very wonderful investment, to be honest. And people, when journalists, like you said, people who say things like, oh, he only won because he's from this part of the world. I mean, they obviously need to, you know, spend more time understanding what journalism is in the first place.
Well, they need to spend more time on themselves and not be such assholes, really.
To be honest. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I just personally think, and this is once again being a journalism student, I see it everywhere. I don't think a lot of people in fashion actually can think for themselves. So what happens is,
yes,
Christian Dior, of course, is an amazing design, but the thing is, part of what makes him amazing is how well his story was told and how documented it was. If his story wasn't documented, no one would know.
Yeah.
So because in the West, we didn't document a lot of the great designers that were in Africa at the time, doesn't mean they don't exist or they didn't live. And I think that narrative of everything that comes from Paris is better than anywhere else in the world is a bit flawed. And I think a lot of people, because their lecturer told them that Crispo Balenciaga is the best thing since sliced bread, they will hear nothing else and not think for themselves or look at anyone else's work. And it's kind of something I see like all the time, honestly.
I mean, just one other thing as well, I was just thinking about as we're talking about this as well, is obviously we're talking about journalism and how fashion is taught and its references. I mean, the other thing with all of this, of course, is how do the African markets react to an African designer as well? Because I mean, I know from the Pacific, sometimes you'll have a Polynesian designer who actually sells better out of Polynesia than in it, because there's all this kind of like weirdness in your own hometown and from where you're from as well. So I don't know, Io, if there was any comments about that with Thebe or any sort of insights onto that you might have as well.
Yeah,
it's a real thing.
Yeah, I didn't ask him about that personally, but I know from being Nigerian, I can't speak of South Africa, but I think in Nigeria especially, in Nigeria it's the type of thing where no one really respects what you do until you get that cosign from the West.
Yeah.
And then suddenly people are like, oh, actually this is worth investing in, which is sad. And I think it comes from that colonial mentality that once white people accept it, then it's worthy of, you know, and I think we need to come out of that sort of thinking. And that's why I love Thebe, because I think Thebe is one brand I've seen that even before he had sort of the Western gaze, there's loads of South African people I know were his customers. So I'm really, really happy about that. And I like, even going back to this collection, there was look 11, I think it was a blazer, but then the wool technique they used on the sleeves was very, very interesting technique. That kind of does look very South African, but it's also still a blazer. And that's something that will work for a lot of people. It's something that is appropriate to wear to a lot of different places as well. So yeah, I just honestly like what he does.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that is joyful that you know, there is, you know, support from everybody. And I mean, I think that's what you get when you look at Thebe's work and the interviews and things like that. It feels incredibly grounded what he's doing, and that the way that they're going forward, and you know, their vision is, you know, squarely planted. It's great. I love it. We should wrap up soon. So, I know, you know, time constraints, but I mean, is there anything else? Anybody want one last comment from everybody as well about it? Aya, we'll start with you again.
I think last thing I want to talk about actually is the Sisterhood logo and how he uses it. Because the Sisterhood logo is an emblem, a really important emblem of the brand. That is meant to represent like the unity between women. If you look at the logo, it's two women kind of hugging each other. And he finds it quite fascinating that some people understand it and then other people just think it's like women having sex or something weird like that. But I like how he's used it as sort of a logo. Daniel talked about the shoes earlier, and that he calls like the Sunday best boots, which I really love. And this idea of, you know, what pastors, the pointy shoes that pastors normally wear
to church.
Yeah, which is hilarious. But also just the way he's used it in the hats. Like I know last season in Counterintelligence, he had these sort of berets that had the Sisterhood logo, and now we have different types of hats. And I really like the way he's used it and the symbolism behind it.
Daniel?
Oh, it's me again. It's funny because on my screen was a girl, she's next, so
I'm doing it alphabetically, so I actually feel I'm feeling a bit shamefaced that George is always the last as well. Don't worry.
Which is really weird as well, because G is not that long, far along in the alphabet. Normally anything alphabetical, I'm never at the end. So this is like I'm kind of loving it. I'm like normally at the beginning. Yeah.
I think, like I said before, this is Thebe's most dramatic collection. It's obviously his most daring, and it seems like he really went in and just like pulled this one out. And I'm just excited to see the amount of controversies, the amount of conversations this particular collection is going to cost. And again, it's going to like probably like impact a lot of us, you know, in terms of education, in terms of style, in terms of the way we see African fashion, you know. And it's also, it will be a good test to see what exactly Thebe will bring out next after this, to be honest. Yeah.
Georgia, your turn.
My turn, last end of the alphabet. I love that look right there, the blue one. That was literally all I wanted to bring up, was that I don't have a reason behind it. I know no meaning. I just aesthetically love that look, and I don't know if it's just like the novelty of fluff on the head or something really unlike, I don't know, but I think it's the cut. Cool. I think it's the cut. I think it's like, yeah, I loved all of the kind of, because they have it on the white dress as well, the like shoulder, you know, it just makes it so like interesting, and the materials are so rich and the textures are so gorgeous, but then there's always like a little tweak of something that makes it just like kind of new and just really cool. And I love that. I think I also just love that image and the casting and the lighting and everything about that. I just like saw it on the runway and was like, that's so stunning. But yeah, I think I'm just really excited, like you said, Daniel, to see what's coming up next, basically, because this is such a strong collection, and I feel like a sense of like such excitement and kind of newness in terms of like, not, it's obviously a lot of his work has homage to tradition and stuff, which is not new, but it's the kind of newness of the meeting of the two, yeah, that kind of modernization and that like kind of tradition and culture. And I love it. I'm very excited.
Right. I mean, I really do love, from looking at work from 3 or 4 years ago, there's a natural progression, and there's shapes and ideas that keep on getting repeated through it all, and styling details, which I love. And you can just sort of see that it's going to kind of build that label and be kind of grounded. I love that people are buying it, and he talks about business women buying it, and they want something that's represents who they are in South Africa. I mean, there's so much to kind of love about that kind of community that he's building and the information that he's giving out. I mean, it's great. So I just want to say thank you to all the panelists. It would have been nice to have been a bit longer and for us to kind of chat a bit, because it's always great to talk to other people about their views, especially about sort of designers who are new, young, people of color, queerness, all the shit I love. It's great. And for more extensive Fashion Week coverage, be sure to visit showstudios.com. And if you're watching Show Studios YouTube, be sure to like, comment, subscribe below, and we'll see you next time. Bye.